Okay, good morning. So I would like to, with your permission, I'd like to dedicate this shir l'refuah shlema, my sister-in-law, who is having an operation right now, and her name is Golda Perel Bas Pesi Nechama l'refuah shlema. Okay, so last week we started going through some of the details of Davar HaMamid, the halachas of Davar HaMamid, and today I would like to broaden it a little bit. We're going to do two things. Number one, just give me a second to close the door. Number one, we will discuss, there are four exceptions to the halach of Davar HaMamid. Okay? One, we kind of discussed some of them already. One is Basa B'chalav. Basa B'chalav is, Davar HaMamid doesn't apply. Why? Because Basa B'chalav is just tam. That's what it is. And therefore, if there is no tam, and it's just a Davar HaMamid, there is no Basa B'chalav. So by definition, it can't really work. And this is connected also to the second exception, if you like, which we saw already in the Ramah, and that is, it has to be Davar, for Davar HaMamid, it has to be for Davar Ha'asa Machmas Atzmai, and not Balua. Remember?
Again, milk and meat, there's no Davar HaMamid.
Again, we'll do Chazara. If Davar HaMamid afilu be'elef lo bottle, right? So you have a tiny amount of Davar HaMamid. Let's think of it in the following terms. You know what? Go back to have a look in the sources. Have a look in the Makoros here. Have a look in the Shulchan Aruch that I gave you. What does it say here? Well, so the Mechaber says, if you're mamid gevina ba'or kevas ksheira, if there is tam basar, it's asa, and if not, it's mutter. Right? Even, right. But then he goes on to say, aval mamid ba'or kevas nevelo treifa, then even 1 in 1,000. So, in other words, if the rennet would come from a kosher animal, then if it's 1 in 100, it's bottled. There's no why. What happened to Mamid? The answer is there's no Issa here. Because once it's, sorry?
Sounds still the other.
That's a separate thing. You're right. There's a halacha vein mevaklin es lechatchila. We're not discussing that. But the question is whether it's mutter or not. So the concept of it would be mutter. The answer is it would be mutter because there is no Issa here. Because once there's no tam, there's no Issa. Yeah? Poshet. Yeah. Let's go on. And this, of course, is connected to the second point, which is that only, as the Ramah says, only something which is asur, machmas, atzmai, but not machmas balua. Now, just to give you a practical example, something I came across in the modern books that talk about kosher food production, that yeast, when they talk about yeast, or the production of glucose, so yeast usually is kosher, it's not a problem, but sometimes glucose is produced by passing it over things which are asa, but they pass over what's called beads of, when you're turning glucose to create fructose, corn syrup. So they pass it over certain enzymes, which are treif, but these beads of enzymes remain intact. They do their job as being enzymes, but without any absorption of the thing itself. The mamid itself, since the mamid itself is kosher, and it only goes through over these kalim, so that you don't have a mamid of a davar ha'asa b'atzmai, so it's mutter. In other words, there are cases where this becomes relevant. The next point, third exemption was zev zegorim, remember? If the davar ha'mamid that is asur couldn't do it on its own, that we saw in the Taz and the Shach. And finally, the Darkei Tshuva, which we saw quoted, and that is, if the Mamid was totally removed, then it's mutter. That's how the Darkei Tshuva paskened. Okay? Remember? We saw the Chakira, went through that shtickle from Rav Shechter with you, the Lomdus, the Shaila in Lomdus, the Chakira about how Davar HaMamid works, and he quoted the Darkei Tshuva, who says that if the mamid is removed, then it is mutter.
And then there's this fourth one where if there's another one that does the same thing.
That was number 3. That was Zev Zegorim. Yeah?
Okay.
Fine. And now we move on. What I thought I would do is move on to probably one of the main sugyas where this is relevant. We saw 3 or 4 citations from the Shulchan Aruch, and most of them seem to center around cheese, right? So I thought we would use this opportunity to maybe broaden the whole discussion into all the different forms of dairy products and the kashrus issues associated with them. So we've got Cholov Yisrael, you have Gvinas Akum, you have butter, there is yogurt, there are different sour cream, different types of cheeses, and all the different halachas and different opinions, right? As it applies to them. But in order to do that, this will take us quite a few sessions. A, it's very relevant, and B, I think we'll get hopefully some clarity in these sugyas which are relevant on a regular basis. In order to do that, we have to first start off with milk. And the first thing that we need to ask ourselves is, what is milk? What is milk? Milk is comprised of 4 main products. Within milk, there is fat, there is protein, there is sugar, and there is water. Those are the 4 ingredients that exist within milk. Approximately 4% of milk is fat. Approximately 3.3% of milk is protein, which then breaks down further. 80% of that is something called casein, C-A-S-E-I-N, and 20% of the protein is something called whey, W-H-E-Y. I don't know all these, in German I don't know all of these terms, I'm afraid. Yeah? So again, so far we've got 4% of milk is fat, approximately. These are approximations. 3.3%, give or take, is protein, of which 80% of that protein is in the form of something called casein, and 20% of it is whey. We'll come back to whey later, that becomes very relevant. Then you have approximately 5% of milk is carbohydrate, which is sugar. The sugar inside milk comes in 2 forms. It's a disaccharide, as it's called. It has lactose and galactose. And it's galactose and glucose. Okay? But the sugar within milk is called lactose, and it is also we'll see whether it's called mei cholov, and that is the sugar element within milk. And finally, the final 87% of milk is basically water. Okay? So that's milk. That's what milk is. A little bit of research and you'll see this. Again, so milk is 87% water, give or take, 5%, give or take, sugar, which is known, milk sugar is known as lactose, which breaks down into galactose and glucose. You have approximately 3.3% is protein, which it breaks down, 80% of that protein is something called casein, which is the key element which forms into cheese, as we're going to see. 20% of it is whey, and then you have approximately 4% is fat. Okay? Before we go any further, let's try and understand what happens to these 4 elements within milk. Yeah? So I'm going to take 1. Remember, we said 5% of milk is carbohydrate, which is a sugar known as lactose. Now, I'm going to do this a little bit backwards, because I'm just going to take one tiny little piece here, and I've printed out for you there a little piece from Rabbi Elyashiv on lactose. Okay? Siman Ein Gimel. It's Kovitz Shuvas Chelik Aleph Siman Ein Gimel Ois Aleph. Says Rabbi Elyashiv, lactose סוכר החלב שבדרך כלל מפיקים אויסוי ממי חלב שהם המים המופרשים לאחר הגיבון. Now the truth is, lactose is present in the milk, right? We said it's approximately 5%, it's the carbohydrate, but it's in suspension, right? It's in, and you can break this down when you turn, as a byproduct, when you create it into cheese, and we'll talk about that process. You can end up with it in a different form, and you get lactose in crystalline form. So it's the sugar element of the milk, which then becomes available to you after you as a byproduct of having made cheese. Now, what is its halacha? Einoi osur machmas cholov akum mishtei sibos. Says Rabbi Yashiv. This, yeah.
What's gibun?
Gibun is the process of creating cheese. Gevina. The process is gibun. Yeah.
Right. So that includes already the curdling and everything and the press.
You end up with lactose in crystalline form, in powdered form, and this is used in tablets. It's used in many different things. It's actually very useful sort of sugar for various reasons. Now, question number 1 says Rabbi Yashiv, Einoi oso machmas cholov akum mishtei sibos. There's 2 reasons. Aleph, number 1, hayois de la'achar irbuvoi b'chomer shebetablet nifsal hu lachilas odom. Once it's used not on its own, but it's put into a tablet. Okay, so we would need to know whether it is milky. There's 2 separate things here, and we're not going to do this today, but make a note, the difference between lactose and lactic acid. Okay, here he's talking about lactose, which may well be milky, but the question is, what about cholav stam? So there he says, number 1, given that it is mixed with other chemicals in the tablet, and as a result it is nifsal melachilas odom vafilu lemachal kelev, therefore there's no problem of cholav akum. Number 2, base, mikiven shahalactose osoi mimei gevina, because it is extracted from the water, the byproduct of making cheese. The Knesset Hagdoila says that the lactose that is extracted from he's not talking about the lactose, he's talking about the mei cholov that is extracted, the byproduct, the whey that is the byproduct of the cheese, of the processing of cheese. There's no issur of cholov stam applies to it. So there's 2 separate reasons why this lactose doesn't have a problem of cholav stam. Move on. Umitamim halalu, and therefore for this reason, muteres bliosa la'achar ma'acholei bosa, and therefore you can take a tablet which contains lactose after a meaty meal. Number 1, mishum shehacholov nifsal me'achilas kelev. The milk element within it is inedible. Number 2, yitochein sheme'achar ve'eno yosui micholav elo mimei gevina. Even if it wasn't nifsal me'achilas kelev, it could be, let's say, was edible on its own, but because it is brought about and produced via the byproduct of what is left after gevina, which according to the Knesset Hagdoila doesn't need cholav stam anyway. The Shach does say that this mei cholov that falls into a machal basar, you've learnt this, it does forbid it, but that's hainu dav klach yachad im habasar va'asu mishum maris ha'ayin aval leval oi el achabasar yitochein shemuta. However, to swallow it after basar, it is okay. So this is in and of itself a very important halacha. You come across a tablet and inside one of the ingredients are lactose, you don't need to be concerned about cholav stam, and you don't need to be concerned about having it after a meaty meal. There's Rabbi Yashiv, very important tshuva. Now,
but according to the Shach, you shouldn't crush it over.
You should not eat it with, yeah. And even that, it might be a bit debatable. Now, here we need to move on to the next big topic, and you missed Ellie. You can look over it again in the thing. We went through the 4 elements of milk. Milk contains 4% fat, 3.3% protein, which is 80% casein, 20% whey. It's 5% carb, which is sugar, lactose, and 87% water. That's milk. That's what milk is. Now, Chazal, as you know, Sugin Avodah Zarah, Chazal forbade Gvinas Akum. Now, there are potentially up to 7 or 8 different reasons, if you've learnt the Sugya, why Gvinas Akum is Asur. However, there's no question that Gvinas Akum is Asur. But in order to understand this, we need to understand cheese production itself. And there are fundamentally 2 ways to create cheese. One is to use rennet, and the rennet, the animal, the protein, the enzyme rennet, what it does is it will solidify and take what's sometimes called, I only know the English terms, the curds away, separate the different parts, and you're left with the casein, which then coagulates, and the runoff is the whey, the mei cholov or mei cholov, depending, because there's kind of 2 types. Sorry?
It's the protein that goes over.
That's right. So the protein coagulates. The main part of it is the rennet acts as a catalyst for the casein, which is the main part of the protein, to coagulate it. Then it becomes called curds, and it becomes cheese, and it solidifies. That's one way, rennet. But there is another way. There is a totally different way. Now that will produce hard cheese. And depending on that, will produce what we call hard cheese, Gouda, all those other different types. Now, because today, of course, it's much more sophisticated, and they throw other cultures in and other bits and pieces. But that is the basic idea. That is hard cheese. You end up with different flavors and different hardnesses and different thicknesses, depending on other stuff they throw in. But that is the underlying thing. There is, however, another way to do it. And it works as follows. And that is, you put acid or vinegar. You could do 2 things. You could just, and this is very important in halacha, you could do nothing. Leave milk out of a fridge for a couple of days. The microorganisms that are within it will alter it. It will ferment. It will lower the pH level below the critical isoelectronic level, which I think is 4.6. If I remember correctly, I read it. So once it gets lowered below 4 points, the pH gets lowered below 4.6, it also begins to separate, and you end up with cheese, but with one difference. You will end up with what you and I would call soft cheese. You cannot mistake the 2. One, you take milk out of the fridge, leave it for a whole bunch of days, you'll end up with something very close to soft cheese. It's also solidified, the protein, the casein has come together, but the acid, so there is acid-set cheese, and there is rennet cheese. One will be hard, one will be soft. Chazal forbade rennet cheese. No question about it. The shaila now becomes, see what they do today is, when you buy cottage cheese, we're going to talk about cottage cheese today. When you buy cottage cheese, which is your classic soft cheese, you don't have a company taking a whole bunch of milk out of the fridge and just leaving it. That's not the way it works, obviously. So what do? They put vinegar in. Sorry?
It's also not very appetizing, doesn't it smell?
Presumably. So what do? They use vinegar. They use an acid of some sort. And this acid, that's what they do. It's mainly, now there's another technical point. They use vinegar, and the vinegar does the job. It lowers the pH immediately, and the process starts very quickly.
It works with lemon juice. My mom used to do
It's the same concept, except they use vinegar. That's what they use. Companies use vinegar. By the way, they also tend to throw in a little bit of rennet, and we're going to see about that. But that is, hopefully, we're going to see is insignificant. So now here's the shaila. Does cottage cheese require a hechsher? In other words, this is separate from, let's assume that this is totally separate from the concept of cholov stam. Let's assume you have, it's cholov. let's say it's chalav. You've got chalav Yisrael, which then a Goysha company throws acid into it. There's no supervision on it. We know what it is, but nobody. By the way, I need to digress for 1 second. We will move back to this to understand what are the actual requirements needed in order to make something Gvinas Yisrael. Is it ownership? Is it just watching it? Or do you actually have to physically take the rennet and throw it in? Which most Hachsherim insist on, by the way. The Mashkech has to do it. So it's not, I'm just throwing it out there as a thought. So to contrast it to cottage cheese. So I have chalav Yisrael, I'm not worried about that. The question is now, I then went away and they threw in the vinegar. Let's assume the vinegar is kosher, not a problem. Am I allowed to eat that, or is it gvinas akum? Does it need a hechsher? Is it included in the gzeira? Do you know?
Based on the fact that there's a risk of having an issue of tam vaso and nevela in there. So if we rule that out, we were left with the kavush maybe, that we have those kind of problems. But then there are other learned already also in all of it where, I mean, the most poskim are maker when it comes to mus grina, for instance.
For what? Sorry.
The press.
Yes.
Yeah. Full screen. Yeah. It's like a key like this with the bolts, right, where you press out the mei chalaf basically the rest of it. And if you would use something like this from the goy, you don't have. Basically, they say there's no kashrus to.
Okay.
Now there might be a kashrus, but basically, if I remember, that's like more than a year ago. So if I remember correctly, then it was mutar lechatchila, even according to many opinions, to use the food gvina. So I guess nowadays you're mostly concerned with the production facility. What are the kelim used for other things or not? How long are they remaining in those kelim, etc.
I think there are 2 points, if I may say. So one is the problem of the rennet, which we don't have here, like the problem of the nevela and things that we don't have it quite here and now, which is read in the Rav Elyashiv, that latter itself is not a problem because it got worked with and everything. So based on that, it looks like the soft cheese has neither of those 2 problems.
Okay, right. Both of you are coming from the perspective that the reason, or the primary reason, that we are forbidding, the Chazal forbade Gvinas Akum is because we're mamid ba'oir kevas nevela. That was the main reason. And the minute you don't have that problem, because soft cheese is not made with keva, it's not rennet based, it's acid based, therefore it just was not included in the gzeira. There is an assumption, just want to point out to you, there is an assumption there that if you learn the sugi in Avodah Zarah, you will see there were 7 or 8 different reasons given, potentially, and there is some lack of clarity as to which one is the main one in the sugi of Gvinas Akum. That's one potential, I'm throwing out one potential problem, but what you said makes sense. Okay, what halacha lemaisa, many minhag America, most kashrus certifying agencies are mekel, and this is based on a ruling from Rav Henkin, Zechrono Livracha. But this is in America. Mekel with soft cheese that provided it's chalav Yisrael. And you have to be careful. Sometimes today they throw in emulsifiers and other stuff. Obviously you have to be careful that they're not going to, there's nothing treif in there, right? But the gzeira of Gvinas Akum wouldn't apply, and therefore what we normally require the mashgiach to do and the involvement of a Yisrael is not normally. There is one major exception, which is the star K. And we're now going to learn Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's famous tshuva on this subject, which you have in your pack. Let's learn it. And it's really, really, really interesting. And I need to give you the background to this tshuva. There is background to this tshuva. Notice this tshuva was written in 1960. Yeah? The tshuva was written in 1960, and notice who it's written to. Malas Kvoid Yedidi Rav Agoin Meireno Rav Shimon Shvab Shlita. So, Rav Shimon Shvab, 1960, was Rav in Ka'ayot, in Broyers, Broyers. And from doing a little bit of digging around, I discovered some historical information that what was happening at the time was that Rav Broyer discovered that I have to be careful what I say because I don't know, but there was a significant amount of his kehillah were eating cottage cheese without a hersha. And you'll see from Reb Moshe that his question to Reb Moshe was how and if he should push back. That was the shaila. Is what they're doing okay? And it was a question of teichacha. It was a question of how, as the Rav of this kehillah at this point in time, how and what should I respond? And this will become clear towards the end of the tshuva. Okay? That's context. I've given you some background. Let's go through this. It won't take us very long because I've done the heavy lifting for you, and I'll rush through it. Hinei. Bidvar hagvina b'shem cottage cheese she'omarti likvod toirosoi sheyesh ta'am lahoke. Says Reb Moshe, the cottage cheese about which I have already told you that there is reason to be lenient. Loimar to say that it was never included in the gezeira of gevina. Why? Because he says, like you guys, the main reason is that's the main reason. Because generally, cheese is created, Chazal's concern was, it is created by rennet. Kevas Nevela. The Tamze, Hodnokat Rambam, and the Mechaber in Simon Kuf Tesvav, Umi Tamze Kosvu hat Toisvers. Now here I have to interject something interesting. I'll give you some interesting information which you may not be aware of. If you ever come across a family from a community where, and you are able to verify that there is an ancient minhag to have gevinas akum, be very careful before you stone them. Why? That Tosfos in Avodah Zarah brings two opinions. Chazon Ish, some debate in the Chazon Ish whether they're exactly the same or not, but Rabbeinu Tam and the Go'onei Narvona, the Chachomim of Narvona, who said that nowadays there's no problem with gevinas akum at all. Gevinas akum is not a problem. Rabbeinu Tam and the Chachmei Narvona, the Go'onei Narvona. Why? Because they understood that the Issa of gevinas akum had to do with something totally different. It had to do with gilui, that things are left uncovered, nothing to do with kevas nevela, and since there's no problem nowadays of gilui, therefore there's no problem at all. And it seems though, certainly was a time where there were communities who had this tradition and paskined like Rabbeinu Tam and Narvona.
Well, in Italy they have.
Italy has some interesting stuff that's more to do with wine, and maybe a story for another time.
Wine and cheese go well together.
Yeah, good one, nice one. Al Kopanim, it was too good an opportunity to miss. Ramesh is quoting this. They were bio, they were vegan. They would make their cheese not with but with prochim, with flowers of some sort. So therefore it's okay. V'hakavana poshut. Says Reb Moshe, it is clear that pshat in that Tosfos is shaloi ayri be'omad sham Yisrael v'ra shehemid beprochim. We're not talking about the Yisrael stood there and watched the process, because then of course it would be mutter. Like the Ramah says that if the Yid sees the asiyas hagvinas ksheiros, then of course it would be okay, even though the Shach argues, blah blah blah. Ela ayri, miss two lines. Ela ayri, clearly it's talking about a case shederachan shehamokim shemamidim beprochim sheyesh midina lemezel basaruba, in a place where they use organic material to be mamid the milk to make cheese, then of course you can follow the rive that this is what they do and it would be okay. V'lochein matirin goinei narvona, and therefore the goinim of narvona were matir af beloy ra Yisrael, even without a Jew being present at all. Ay, v'Rambam v'mechaber osri. It is true, we don't paskin like the goinei narvona. The Rambam and the Mechaber forbid it. Shekva gozru al kol gevinois ha'akum. It becomes a dover sheba minyan. Because Chazal, according to the Rambam and the Mechaber, and this is how we paskin, we view the Isser on cheese. That's why you can't buy vegetarian cheese today. If it's proper, vegetarian cheese. Yeah? Not vegan, vegetarian, yeah? That you can't buy. Why? Because if it is cheese, if it is milk and it's cheese, but it's not done through rennet, but it's done through something else, there is absolutely no question that it is also, it's cheese. Yes? Even therefore, even if they use as a ma'amid something which is mutter, gzeira, because gzeira mishum amidos of davasa. V'hamagid mishnah hisav sha'af shabatel atam leibatra hagzeira mishum shnesa b'minyan. V'kavonosai. What does the Magid Mishnah mean? The af bizman she'ein mi sheyamid b'dvar isur. What happens if the time would come when the whole world goes mad and they all become vegan or something, and nobody ever uses rennet anymore? It's too late. Cheese is cheese is cheese. Avol imkain. Now, on the one hand, that sounds very strict. It is strict. I have had...
What's the mechanism when we say like a davar galu is not applicable anymore because
yes.
you put flowers and they're not poisonous snakes that we're afraid of or whatever, unless you were inclined and you whatever stringent on that. Like, why is there the Metzius informing the Gzeira, the status of the Gzeira, and here it might not? When do we say
so the concept of davar shebeminyan. Some davar shebeminyan, and this is a separate. I'm happy to do a shir on it. It's very important. There were some gezeiros which are considered davar shebeminyan, and once you have a davar shebeminyan, the mechanism is af shebotel hatam loy botel hagzeira. Davar shebeminyan. And that's, so he brings this. Even though he writes it, even though the bottle, the tam, the gezeira does not go away. But now, how do you identify what's a davar shebeminyan? That's a good question, and the Gemara often discusses that. By the way, davar shebeminyan means that it needs Elohim. You can't be matrit Elohim Kain a chacham who's gadol b'menu b'chachma u b'minyan, and we have to know what that means and how that operates. Rav Feinstein's given a very nice shir on that. I've heard it from him here at least once. Ask him on that. I think so. I'm pretty certain. But okay. But so that is a gzeira, and gvinas akum is generally understood to be fall into that category.
But in a different
yes, that's something like eggs and no, don't mean that. No. Gzeira, the idea of a gzeira being a davar shebeminyan.
All right, I'll dig into it.
Okay, now, however, says Reb Moshe, avol, fourth line down, avol imkein yesh ta'am godol. Sherak hagvinois shetzrichin le'eze ha'amoda. Here, Rav Moshe uses a beautiful, simple, elegant svara. It therefore follows logically that this would only apply to cheese, the type of cheese that is produced only through ha'amoda. Yeah. Now you can then start saying, well, usually we use rennet, but you could also use organic material. Then you could say, too bad, gzeira finished. But that is only for a cheese that is produced exclusively via the process known as ha'amoda. Yeah? Bezeh pligig al goynin arvona va'asr mishum sheshayach behu ligzer mishum ha'ma'amidim b'davar asr aval hagvinois levanot. But the white cheese, he calls it, she'ein tzarich ha'amoda. You do not, white cheese, we'll call it soft cheese. Soft cheese is not produced via the mechanism of ha'amoda. Minesinas eze davar klal. You don't need to do anything to produce soft cheese. Just take the milk out of the fridge. That's it. That's all you need to do. This is not something that requires ha'amoda. The time and ambient temperature will do the rest. Therefore, there's a very strong svara to say Einon Bichlal Lo Isur. Kivin Shlei Shaykh B'hu Agzeira Mishum Ha'Mamidim B'Dava Osa Shari Inin Gvina Acheres. It's a totally different type of thing. Shalei Dami Lehu Loi B'Tam V'Loi B'Mara. It looks different. It tastes different. We don't just say cheese. You say soft cheese, hard cheese, because they look different, they taste different, they are produced in entirely different processes, and therefore, therefore there's a very strong svara to say, says Rav Moshe, that they were never included in the Gzeira, even according to the Rambam. Forget the Gain in Arvoina, of course, but even the Rambam and the Mechaba, where we are machmir now even for vegetarian cheese, which is done through prochim. But that's only cheese which is done through ha'amoda. But a cheese that never requires ha'amoda at all was never included in the Gzeira. Then he brings a Vilna Gaon. We can leave it out. Now, go down a few more lines. The line begins Bichlal HaGzeira. Have you got it? Go down a few more lines. The line begins Bichlal HaGzeira. Got it? Yeah. Okay. Says Rav Moshe, Va'af she'oimrim shegam begvina zu de cottage cheese noisnim at rennet. But you should know, and this is true today, by the way, that even in acid-set cheese, vinegar, soft cheese, they do put in a bit of rennet. Hine. Im neimesh rennet u dava osor. If you're going to tell me that the rennet is a dava osor, sorry, he says, even if you're going to tell me the rennet is mamish osor, mistaber she'ein lahachshivo mamid, but it's mistaber that it should not be considered a mamid. Why? Number one, kiven de'ein lahagvino shum toy eles mizeh. The cheese gains nothing from the addition of this rennet. The cheese doesn't taste any better or different because you put the little bit of rennet in more than if you would have just left it on its own. And the fact that so then why do they do it? Why do the manufacturers put rennet in? Because it speeds up the process. This does not add anything to the quality, of the cheese. It's just for the convenience, the process, the production. It's his cost and time. That's all. It's for the moicher. He gets his gvinas quicker. Therefore, you can't come along and say the rennet will be mamid. In other words, something that would happen on its own, and you want to speed up the process, is not called mamid. V'gam levad svara zu, says Rav Moshe. But even besides for this svara, maximum, it's zevezegoyrem. Maximum. And it's even more. Because the chaim and the zman would do it on its own. Therefore, it's not even a proper mamid. It wouldn't do it on its own. The rennet on its own, they only put tiny amounts in, by the way. Tiny amounts of rennet. So, if you'd left it, it would all happen on its own. So it's not even zeh. It adds nothing, and it's not even a mamid, and therefore you should just look at it as a messiah ba'alma. V'nimtza, last 4 lines. V'nimtza shemitzad harenet ein lanu le'aser ela mitzad etzem gzeres hagvina, and therefore there's al zeyesh tam godoy loyma shaloi ha'sagvina zu b'chlala isur. There's a very strong lomdus to say this was never included. Just when you thought it was all going swimmingly well. Ach yesh la'ayin mitzad tam Reb Chanina. Now here, we'll start it now. Tzechzuchei chalav. You know what? You need to know this. You can write this down, underline it, highlight it. You need to know what this phrase, tzechzuchei chalav, which means little bits. Let's just call them little bits of chalav that may remain in your final mixture. Liquid, and this is relevant for butter. Production of butter, we'll come back to it. Sichzuchei chalav. Not mei chalav and not curds. But there is a concern, according to Rabbi Chanina in the Gemara, a residue of sichzuchei chalav. Right? L'Rashi, Shapira shehu tam shel isur gvina. Rashi holds that's the isur of gvina. Eve the Tur also brings this. The Gaon says it depends on the machlokes b'achema, whether we ask a chema of akum like Reb Chanina because maybe there is still milk there, or and the matirim are like Shmuel, and then he goes into milk. Now, go 3 lines over the next page. And we're going to finish this now. Ubigvina to cottage cheese, yesh lachluchas shem tzechzuchei chalav. It is true. You will find in cottage cheese it is not uncommon to find a little bit of milk in it. Avol, la mekilin b'cholav ha-companies. Those that are mekel on the cholav of companies, this is the way Rabbi Moshe calls cholav stam, he calls it the cholav of the companies, yeah? Those that are mekel, i.e. himself, of the cholav companies, shaloi lahachshiv l'cholav akum, ube'arti shahadin noitekain, and I've already explained that it is plausible and reasonable to assume that that is the din. Then, harei ein b'hu tzich cholav isur. There's no problem with tzich cholav. So we don't have a problem. V'lachein yesh tam gadol lahakel. Mikol mokoim. And here we get to the final point, and here you can hear not only a psak halacha but horah, and he's instructing Rav Shvab how to respond to his flock. Mikol mokoim lemaisa eini omer bezeh heta. Very interesting language. He says, however, I'm not going to say definitively it's mutter. Aval gam eini moicha b'hamekilin. But nor am I going to object to those who are lenient. Because there is, as I've outlined, reason to be lenient, and it is, after all, a quote-unquote only a drabanan. Now, it's true we don't paskin like the Goyin in Arvona, but they hold there is no gvinas akum. And you can combine them, bring into the cheshbon their opinion, insofar as not to object. V'lochein, and here is his hoyra'ah to Rav Shvab. V'lochein eini roya choyva al kvod toirosoi harama lahoyros leisur leha'ein shoyalin. Let's unpack that phrase. And therefore I see that you, Rav Shvab, have no obligation to publicize that it is also to those who do not ask you. Ubifrat, and on top of this, especially, sheyesh gam sofek shelo yitzaisu. Rav Shvab had significant concern. He wasn't sure they would even listen to him. He wasn't sure that his flock would listen to him if he did say they shouldn't. So putting it all together, says Reb Moshe, sheyesh gam mitam mutav shiyu shoygegin, aval lefarseim sheyesh mokem lahatir. But to publicize that there is room to be lenient, vaday einoi min haroi. Nor is it appropriate to put in the shul newsletter that there is room to be lenient. That's wrong either. Notice what's coming across. Absolutely fascinating. This is it's a masterclass in hoirah. And again, of course, hakol lefi hazman v'hamokim. Rav Shvab had shared with him the concerns, and Rav Moshe addresses it vis-a-vis those who don't ask him. Those who don't ask him. Those who don't ask him, he says, you have no obligation to put it in the newsletter that it's proactively go and tell them that it's also, because there is a strong reason to believe it might be mutter. And one second, and especially as Rav Shvab himself was unsure they would even listen. So putting it all together, you should not, those who don't ask, you should not proactively go and tell them that it's also. On the other hand, to write in the shul newsletter that there is reason to believe there is mokoim that it is mutter, you shouldn't do that either. In other words, you know what he's done? This is my take. What he's done is, he has said to Rav Shvab, be reactive and not proactive. He's cut off from him both avenues of proactivity. Not to put in the shul newsletter that it's okay, nor to publicize that it's not okay. In other words, he said, you be reactive, not proactive. So what would he say to Rav Shvab? Would say, if somebody comes to ask me, if I may, I would suggest based on this, I think he would, and I would do the same. I think this is what he's saying is, know your customer. If this is somebody who you think would listen to you, you should probably tell him not to. If it's somebody is not going to listen, you're worried he may not listen to you, and he's not ready to take that on, then to react and to say, there are opinions that say it's okay. I think that would be the line. Al kol ponim, here, this is the famous tshuva of Rav Moshe on cottage cheese. Like I say, and we'll talk a bit more about it tomorrow. Besides, to the best of my knowledge, besides for Star K, most, I think the OU, I'll double check, have to be careful putting this on camera, but I think they are makel. They are maker like Rav Moshe. The Starkei is more machmir, and again there is an oral tradition. It doesn't appear to be written anywhere from Rav Henkin, who goes even more. He's more makel than Rav Moshe.
In what way?
To say that it is okay. See, Rav Moshe, clearly what comes out of Rav Moshe is that he probably held Me'ikah Hadin it's okay, but he didn't want to definitively paskin that it's okay.
I'm a little bit troubled in two aspects.
Okay.